We'll go ahead and get started. We want to be respectful of your time from Cal and Sol, and thank you again for being here. We know that this has an important step for you as you move towards taking the Board of Governors exam, and also know that you are making that commitment on Saturday, so we do appreciate it. So the topics are listed here, and we're so happy to have Rick present those, and we'll go ahead and go to the next slide and go with our introductions again. I'm Sherry Ambrose, and here with as a co-chair of the member advancement committee for Cal, and we'll pass it to Nora.
Hi, good morning. Nora Powers, co-chair, member of this awesome committee for 10 years now.
Hi, everyone. Rick Miller.
Good morning, Michael DeCoco, member of the committee. Welcome, everyone.
Go to our Sol partners next.
Hi, good morning, everyone. My name is Thuy Do, and I am part of the San Diego chapter. I currently reside here in Sacramento, but still a Sol co-chair with Nicholas Hans. We both just graduated with our respective degrees, master, for Nick, master in business administration, and myself in public health. And joining us next week will be Angela Rivera, and she will be discussing healthcare IT and cyber security. So she's just knowledgeable in that. So we look forward to meeting her next week. Thank you.
And we got Nick. All right, Nora, you want to take us through updates?
Okay, so a couple of updates. Okay, there were a lot of questions last week about some of the information that David introduced. We are still putting together some sample questions that will include some simple math, and we'll include that in our final package that we send out in the next session. And next session's our last session, so I hope to have a whole bunch of goodies in there. We had a question about payback period in the budgeting process and capital investment, all that stuff. And it's the period of time it takes to return an initial investment. Pretty straightforward, actually. It's the period is the initial investment, or how much we think we're going to invest, over estimated cash flow, what we think we're going to get. Example, if our initial investment is 100,000 and we think that the cash from it's going to be 20,000, it'll be 5 years for the payback period. And so however that fits into the budget, that's too long, too expensive, actually a bargain, at least you'll know. Next week's session is healthcare technology and information management, which is 9% of the exam, and quality and performance management, which is 10%. And next slide. Yay! Okay, so our Halloween costume contest. This is this is our second, but the first one was a hoot. So we'd like to see you on video in costume, and we'll vote at the end. And look at her. And the top two will win something. We're not sure yet, but plus notoriety. You know. Okay, next slide. Okay, this is Sherry's specialty.
Again, we have been talking a lot about test taking tips and reiterating things around using your own relaxation technique for breathing, clear thinking, whatever works for you. We've talked about the options of looking at the question as a true or false in terms of the answers, and rereading. We've been aware of that, and some of the distractors that come up as in the options as an answer. Just be aware of those. Again, the time frame, you have 6 hours, so allow yourself that time if you need it. Most people don't, but and mark questions and come back. And we've been talking a little bit more about time management and how to make sure you are taking the time for the exam. What works for you? Do you carve out an hour of your day? Do you use the weekends? And it would be great to hear from the group in the chat how you are managing your time during your study sessions, what you've set up in terms of are you planning over a 4-month period, and how you're doing it, because that helps others as well as at the end, the option of looking at your colleagues in the chat and deciding if you'd like to reach out and set up a study group, because those are also very beneficial in this model. And we've talked about today, any of these tips are transferable to any other test you might take, or anyone that you know is taking tests or exams. So thanks for putting in what you're doing to try and do time management with the exam. Thank you. Next slide. We will turn it over to Rick.
Okay, hi. We've got 3 topics today, so I'm not going to read them word for word to make sure that we can spend more time on the questions. But let me just emphasize a couple things on the professional ethics part. One is that the emphasis is going to be on managerial ethics, not on bioethics. We were talking earlier about the story this week about using a pig kidney as a human kidney as part of an experiment, and thought, well, that certainly raises a lot of interesting ethical issues, which it does, but those are not likely to show up on the test. However, you do have to understand the process for approving human subjects testing, and the role of the ethics committee and the human subjects committee in there, but not specific bioethical issues. The emphasis is on managerial ethics, and if I could give you one piece of advice on this, it's really become familiar with the ACHE Code of Ethics. Okay, that's the area that you're likely to see a lot of specifics on. So look at the Code of Ethics itself. Less time, but make sure you're familiar with the ethical statements that they have for different areas, like impaired physicians and other more specific areas. But the Code of Ethics itself, really try to become familiar with it. You're not going to memorize the entire code, I hope. But it's divided up into different areas, like responsibilities to the organization, responsibilities to employees, responsibilities to patients, to the community. So make sure you're familiar with how those areas work and the types of things that are under there. And I think that will help you get into the specifics that you may need to know. And one of the big things, of course, is what is the consequences of breaching the Code of Ethics if someone files an ethics complaint against you? What might happen? So you got to be familiar with that process. And the answer is they could actually, technically, they could throw you out of ACHE. I don't know if that's ever happened, but they could do it. Okay. Why don't we move on to the next slide? And there you see, okay, the consequences of unethical issues and the human subject stuff. They also want you to at least be, in passing, familiar with some of the other organizations, and American Medical Association, American Nurses Association. So spend a few minutes looking at their codes of ethics also, and see where they overlap with ACHEs and where they're different. Next slide. Okay, so first question. I think, Michael, you've got the odd ones.
Yeah, I think I'm the first question is the primary task of an ethics committee is to so this is mouthful, the selections are mouthful. So if I'm taking the exam, I will apply Sherry's advice, take a deep breath. So A, arbitrate conflicting decisions by caregivers after the patient and or the immediate family are notified about the matter. B, develop the organization's ethic plan. C, act as the surrogate body for regular decision makers, such as physicians, patients, and families when conflicts arise. And D, formulate policy and educate hospital personnel about healthcare ethics in general. So I think, Rick, you want to start your brainwalk on this? So,
C's and D's.
I should put in my, unmute myself. The first one we can look at and eliminate is wrong because they do not arbitrate. They do mediate. They try to get people to talk to each other, but the ethics committee is not a decision maker. They will have input into the ethics plan, but they're not going to develop it themselves. They're definitely not a surrogate body. Okay, they're not the decision maker. So we've eliminated the first three already. Hopefully the fourth one's good. And formulate and educate, formulate policy and educate hospital personnel. That's the biggest thing they do. They advise people. They do education of staff. They have input into policy if they don't develop it themselves. So I would go with D.
Yay.
yay, that's correct.
I always feel better when I get it correct.
Okay, so question 2. A conflict of interest may be only a matter of degree, but does exist when a healthcare executive refuses to, and if we can start getting some answers here, accept gift or benefits with the implied expectation of influencing the management decision, use authority or information to make a decision that intentionally affects the organization in an adverse manner, disclose to the appropriate authority any direct or indirect financial personal interests that pose potential questions, or D, allow a friend to benefit from his, her authority or inside information. And remember, if you read this, a conflict of interest may be only a matter of degree, but exists when an executive refuses to do something. Okay, Rick.
Okay, so when I read through this the first time, I was thinking, wait a minute, all of these are right. What's going on here? And then I went back and I looked at the question again. And remember RTFQ, read the question. And it's not what is a conflict of interest, but it's when the executive refuses to. So it becomes a negative. So refusing to accept gifts, no, that's a good thing. Refusing to hurt your organization, no, that's a good thing if you refuse that. Refuse to disclose information. Well, one of the things you should do if you have a conflict of interest is you disclose it and then you recuse yourself from the decision. We all have conflicts of interest, so that's not in itself a bad thing as long as we disclose and recuse. So C looks right. And then D, refuse to allow a friend to benefit. That one also looks right. So I'm between C and D here. I'm going to look at them more closely. Refuse to disclose. No, okay, no, that's wrong because if I'm refusing to disclose, that's a problem. Okay, so I'm going to go with D. Oh, and I'm wrong.
But some folks had C, so congratulations, C. Maybe if you put in there why you picked that would be helpful.
Yeah, exactly. Again, it's a matter of degree, and there may not be a conflict of interest. The key is he's refusing to disclose the issue. It could be that as long as it's disclosed and discussed, it's not an issue.
Okay, I'm going to challenge this one. I really think C is wrong. If you're refusing to disclose, that's a problem. Whereas if you're refusing to allow a friend to benefit.
No, allow a friend.
Yeah, but
Oh,
you're
yeah,
refusing
refuse
to.
to. Okay.
I'm going to challenge. I think D is the right answer.
Okay. Good point. Why don't I try to research that a little further?
Please.
Okay.
Wouldn't be the first time I was wrong, but it just, this one looks wrong for me. Let's go to the next one.
Next question. The major purpose of a code of ethics for members of a healthcare executives association is to A, provide guidance to members in their own professional conduct, B, increase public understanding of the professional association, C, provide a framework of disciplining members when necessary, ooh, and D, provide a framework for annually evaluating professional performance.
Okay, so I'm looking at the major purpose. Okay, it may mean there's other purposes, but I'm looking at the main one. So provide guidance to members. Yeah, that's for sure. Increase public understanding. Probably not going to do that. Certainly, it's not the major one. Provide a framework for disciplining. Well, that's because something went wrong if you have to discipline someone. So again, that's not the major one. The major one is stop it. And provide a framework for evaluating. Definitely not. Ethics may be one of the things you're evaluating, but that's not why we have a code. So I'm going to go with A. Now, I noticed that people are jumping in really fast with the right answer, and often you are right on that, but try to get in the habit of really analyzing all four of them. Don't just go with the one you think is right immediately. Don't just scan them. Really look at each of the four with that true false approach. And again, remember, you've got plenty of time. You are not rushed during this test. So take your time to answer it. Let's go with the next one.
Okay, a non-legitimate reason to release information from a patient's medical record is when, okay, non-legitimate reason, A, subpoenaed by a court order, B, requested by the spouse or next of kin, C, the patient becomes incompetent, or D, reporting statistics for a research project. I always get screwed up on this one, right?
Yeah, thanks. You're going to make me do it. Me too. Okay, so the key is, again, look at non-legitimate reasons. So you do have to make sure you're looking for negatives. So here would be really helpful if you know when you can release information. Certainly you can release information if it's subpoenaed, so that's legitimate. Requested by a spouse or next of kin? No, not usually. You usually can't do that. If the patient becomes incompetent, then you would have to release it to whoever is their decision maker now. So that one probably is legitimate. And reporting statistics, as long as it's not including the PHI, the personal health information, that's legitimate. So I'm going to go with B. Okay, again, I think that's wrong. I think it's B.
Okay, we will take a look at that one as well.
One
I
thing
think our
that
arrows got moved.
I do recognize that, you spouses can request. What it doesn't say is whether if there is an authorization that's on file by the patient that information can be disclosed, we can. The same thing with patient becoming incompetent or to medically make their own decisions is tied to his on record having a advanced directive. So I'm not sure what assumptions we make when we answer these questions. Maybe somebody can talk about that.
Well, in law school, you learn that the favorite answer to everything is it depends, right? So requested by the spouse or next of kin, well, it depends whether or not the person has permitted that. If the patient becomes incompetent, you can't release it to the entire world, but you can release it to the person who becomes the decision maker, which might be the spouse or next of kin, or it might be someone else. So it's all it depends there on B and C. But A, I don't think there's any doubt. If the court orders you to release it, you release it.
It's true.
Good point. I'll research that one further too.
Number 5, which of the following conditions must be met for human subjects to be used in a medical research program? A, no suitable animal model exists for use instead of people. B, the research program has been approved by the medical staff. C, the research program has been approved by the governing authority. And D, risks should be clearly explained in understandable language to each individual subject.
Oh, okay. So what do we have to do to use human subjects? Well, no animal model exists. Yeah, for the initial stages, but the later stages, you got to use people. You can't put something on the market if it's just animal tested. Medical staff doesn't need to approve it. Governing authority doesn't need to be. They might, depending on the liability of the organization, but not usually. But risk should be clearly explained. Yeah, absolutely. You've got to explain the risk to people. They have to be able to give informed consent to the experiment. So I would go with D.
Okay, all of the following are commonly recognized to be right of each patient, except, pesky except in there, except the right to receive considerate and respectful care, access protective services, communicate with a caregiver in the language of patient's choosing, or be informed about and participate in decisions regarding their care.
You want me to answer this one? Well, I don't know. I mean, all of them kind of look like they're things that, as a patient, I would want. So do I have a right to consider and respectful care? Probably less than the others. Do I have a right to access protective services? Yeah. I mean, if I'm being abused, I don't think the hospital can block me from calling them. Communicate with a caregiver. Well, that's an it depends, because it depends on the situation. But if I can't communicate directly with a caregiver, I should get translation. D is definitely right. D is the basic one. So A, B, and C are all possibles for me. And I'm going to go with C. And someone noted that's a California thing, and that may be the answer.
And that is correct. And you're right. You know, in California, it's a thing, and it may be in some other states, but I'm not aware of it being across the nation. And this is one of those where we need to be really careful. Is this, we know what our industry is here. And some of you may have experience in healthcare, you know, the industry in other states. I was surprised when we first got this question too, way back in the day, but you're right, it's a state thing.
And I think there's several hospitals I'd like to remind of A.
Yeah, true.
Without mentioning any of them by name. Yeah.
Agreed.
All right, let's move to the next one.
The ethical precepts, organizational philosophy that guide an organization's activities are found in a variety of sources that are A, reflected in everyday actions, B, the sole province of senior management, C, part of the governing body's formal actions, or D, written and unwritten.
Okay, well, I hope they're reflected in everyday actions. That's probably at least partially true. Sole province of senior management, absolutely not. Part of governing board's formal actions, they may have an organizational code of ethics, but it's not going to cover everything. Written and unwritten, are they found? Yeah, they are found in both codes of ethics and also just our culture. So I'm between A and D. And which one is more right? I think D is more right. I think it's broader because the unwritten is included. Excuse me, the reflect in everyday's action is included in unwritten. So I'm going to go D.
And you hit the nail on the head, Rick, when you said, what's the most right and what's the broadest?
Because A is
And I had-
right. A is not a wrong answer. It's just that D is a better answer. So if you look at how A is included in D, that's why I would go with D.
Perfect. The healthcare executive with opposing duties, meaning one, I think it should be meaning one of which makes it
No.
impossible to meet the other.
No, that's correct. Meeting one of the duties means you
Oh,
can't
that's
meet
right.
the other one. So meeting is
Yeah,
correct.
okay, yeah. It has a conflict of interest. B, management ethical dilemma. C, need for a consultant. Or D, responsibility to protect themselves.
Well, okay, so that's kind of the definition of a conflict of interest, that you have more than one duty and you can't meet both of them. So that is a conflict of interest. So A looks good. That's a management ethical dilemma, certainly, but that doesn't tell us a lot. You're not supposed to need a consultant to not commit ethical violations. You should just know how to do it. And you have a responsibility to protect yourself. Well, yeah, by not having the conflict of interest. So eliminate that. I'm going to go with A. A is the best answer here.
Rick, what's the legal term for something that's like valid just on the face of it?
Prima facie?
So is that what you would consider the prima facie definition of conflict of interest?
Kind of. I mean, just by the definition, what is a conflict of interest? It's when you have multiple duties and you can't meet both of them. So example, if you're on the board of a hospital and the hospital is contracting in the area that your company is bidding on, you can't vote for that contract because you have a duty to your company, but you also have a duty as a member of the hospital board. So the conflict is automatically there. You can't live up to both of them. So you disclose it to the board and you recuse yourself from that vote.
Thank you. Okay,
Okay.
you're up again.
That is it for ethics. So let's move on to laws. Laws is one of the areas on the test where it's really asking that you know a bunch of the laws, right? That there's sort of no way around it other than to know what a lot of these are. And in the video, I gave you a way of classifying it, and in the same way that the code of ethics is broken down into different parts. And if you learn the parts, it helps you learn the specifics. So I would start your outlining, your studying, whatever you do, by looking at those categories and then start looking at what laws fit in there. And you just got to know what they are. There's a bunch of them that are going to show up and you got to know what they are. So again, you can look at the specifics of these. I'm not going to read it word for word for you. You should know. Can we move to the next one, please? Oh, we got confidentiality in there twice because it's so important, and it is. We get hit with that quite a bit, the confidentiality laws. A specific one you should know is, what does it take to be a nonprofit? And that may show up under business as well as under laws and ethics, but what does it take to be tax exempt? And know the process, know the legislative process. That's one of those things that it'll take you back to your high school civics class of how we go through the process. And if that's too long ago for you to remember, as it is for a lot of us, go Google "I'm only a bill," right? It's great. You get that song stuck in your head, but it really gives you like a 2-minute summary of the legislative process, and that's all you need to know of how the process works. Next one.
Okay,
Actually, before we start that, Michael, sorry, one last thing, which is ACHE counts contract law under business, not under law and ethics. So you do have to know that. And just because it's not showing up here doesn't mean you don't need to know it. They just showed it elsewhere. Okay, sorry, go ahead.
okay. And one thing, probably a reminder again for laws and regulation is always think of the federal level. So if you're answering.
Before I forget, it turns out for question 4 back in ethics about the non-legitimate reason, and I'll clarify this at the end as well. I was incorrect. This is what I get for doing this late at night. It's when it's requested by the spouse or next of kin. So that's the non-legitimate reason. The rest are legitimate reasons. So I apologize for that.
Okay, thank you, Nora. So question number 1 for laws and regulations. Ownership and control of medical records associated with hospital delivered services rests with the A, hospital, B, physician, C, patient, or D, insurer.
And what you have to know here about medical records, and there's a few things you want to know about med records, but one is the difference between ownership of the record and ownership of the information or access to the information. So the healthcare provider who creates the record owns that physical record. Patients do, of course, have access to their own information, but they do not own the record. So in this case, it's medical records associated with hospital delivered services. And that's key because otherwise say, well, wait a minute, physician would own the records for the physician office, and that is very true. But here we're talking about hospital delivered services, so it's going to be A, the hospital.
Okay, now again, don't just jump to the answer right away, but there's a couple things here that make this jump out. The rules governing the acceptance and treatment of emergency patients are known as, and again, we're talking federal, and I think the key word in there is emergency. Rick, sorry, didn't mean to steal your thunder. What do you think?
Okay, so this is what I love these because you have to know what the initials stand for, and this is certainly a good place for a lot of acronyms that you want to translate. So EMTALA is the Emergency Medical Treatment and Active Labor Act. Oh, okay, emergency patients, emergency medical treatment, looks good. EEOC, emergency employment, no, doesn't sound right. Stark 2, now Stark is physician conflict of interest, right? Physician referral to a service owned by the physician. So now we eliminate that. COBRA is the Consolidated Omnibus Budget Reconciliation Act, right? You probably never need to know that again, but that's what it stands for. Now, EMTALA actually passed as part of that act. So at least at the beginning, people talking about EMTALA might refer to COBRA, but EMTALA is the more precise part of the law. And we're hearing a lot of talk right now about reconciliation acts again. But I'm going to go with A.
Correct.
Good.
Again, yeah, you got to know those acronyms, and our industry is famous for acronyms. My daughter thought COBRA was the snake. She's like, what does a snake have to do with treating patients?
Well, I always tell my students they're learning a foreign language called TLA, which stands for 3-letter acronyms.
Next question. Which of the following is the clear trend regarding a hospital's liability for the actions of members of its medical staff? A, the hospital may be held liable for a physician's negligence even though the physician is an independent contractor. B, hospitals are not liable for such actions because they are simply physical sites where patients receive treatment from privately retained physicians. C, courts are becoming more reluctant to impose liability on hospitals for the negligence of physicians who use their facilities. And D, The hospital is liable if the physician is an employee.
Okay, so the question itself is pointing me to a trend. And that's a good red flag to not go with, but I heard about, or in our hospital this happened, or it used to be. So I'm looking for what's the trend. The trend, the hospital may be held liable for physicians' negligence. Probably, so I'm going to hold on that one. It looks good. Hospitals are not liable because they're simply physical sites. Yeah, well, that's the way it used to be. If we want to go back about 50, 60 years, yeah, that would have been right, but it's not the current trend. Courts are more reluctant to impose liability. No, I think it's the other way around. And the hospital is liable only if the physician is an employee. Nope, because we have other situations where the hospital is holding the person out as an employee, so, or as an agent. So the number of hospital-based physicians is actually increasing the hospital's liability, even if they're contractors and not employees. So A is going to be the best answer for me.
And, you know, again, when you first see this, I know it looks like a lot of words and it's busy and there's just a lot in there, but Rick did a really good job of picking out, you know, and again, read this backwards even each answer, and you'll pick up on the clues about what's not correct. Next slide. Okay, in general, courts exhibit what attitude regarding controversies over medical staff privileges? Okay, in general, courts exhibit what attitude regarding controversies over medical staff privileges? I had to read that twice. Okay, human lives are at stake and the courts must intervene to protect physicians' right to choose those lives, save those lives. The decision was supported by reasonable evidence. Courts will not substitute their judgment for that of the hospital board. Hospitals must not be permitted to interfere with the doctor-patient relationship. Or D, courts may not entertain suits regarding medical staff privileges. We're getting some answers already.
Okay, so let's emphasize medical staff privileges here. And that's important in the last few weeks, because we've seen cases where hospitals are being sued, demanding that they permit physicians to administer unapproved medications. So we're not looking about those. They're interesting, but that's not this question. This question is privileges. So courts must intervene. No, they're going to let hospitals make a lot of the decisions. If they're supported by reasonable evidence, courts will not substitute their judgment. That sounds closest to the rule. Hospitals must not be permitted to intervene, and no, we know that hospitals are liable for the actions of their medical staff. The Board of Trustees is the final decision maker on medical staff privileges, so that's not right. Courts may not entertain suits. Yeah, courts don't like being told they can't talk about something, so we can eliminate that one. So, must they intervene? Well, that's one of those, it depends. It depends on the situation, whether courts are going to intervene. But on medical staff privilege, they're going to pretty much go with what the hospital says, as long as it's reasonable. So I'm going to go with B.
Good job. Now, one of the things to notice in this slide is we're talking in general, okay? And then those three other answers have strong words like must, will not, must not. You know, those are key to focus in on, and that helps with the true false brainwalk also.
Never say never, never say always.
There we go. Okay, next slide, please.
So, a joint venture laboratory owned by a hospital and physicians on its medical staff would probably be in violation of fraud and abuse laws if it were to A, market its services to both investors and non-investors, B, offer ownership shares at the same price to referrers and non-referrers, C, require investors to refer business to them, and D, base its profit distribution on the amount of the capital contributed, not on referrals.
Okay, so this is going to require me to know something about fraud. And I know that physicians are not allowed to self-refer. That is, if the physician owns the laboratory, the physician cannot legally refer patients to that laboratory. And I also know that hospitals are not allowed kickbacks. In other words, if you give someone medical staff offices and they're required to refer patients to the hospital, then I've got a kickback here. So it sounds something similar here. I'm going to keep those in mind. Okay, market its services to both investors and non-investors. Doesn't sound like a problem. Offer ownership shares at the same price to referrers, non-referrers. Again, not a problem. You're treating people equally. Require investors to refer business. Now that's a big red flag. Require the investors to do the referral. Okay, and then base its profit distribution on capital contributed, not on referrals. Well, that's standard. That's how you distribute properties or profits, is how much of an ownership share. So if you did it based on referrals, that would be an issue because that's encouraging people to refer more business to you. So I can eliminate A, B, and D, and I'm going to go with C.
And I suggested that people had picked C. Add what you thought in terms of your brain walk, because it's good for you to tell us what you see.
And on the question number 5, something also to remember is the difference of fraud and abuse laws, anti-kickback, and the Stark laws. So sometimes those 3 laws can be confusing. So you have to know the difference on those.
There's a bunch of fraud laws, and fraud, of course, in healthcare is becoming a more popular topic for the feds to deal with. And there's a lot of really interesting fraud going on that they're trying to prevent. So know those laws.
Great.
The thrust of antitrust legislation as applied to the healthcare field is to A, contain costs, B, contain rising costs of independent single unit hospitals, monitor the scope of health services provided in a given area, or protect the public's economic interest.
Okay, so I need to say, I actually went to law school originally because I love antitrust law, so I'm having a good time with the question. Contain costs. Well, yeah, you want to contain costs, but costs are not the only factor. Besides cost, we have quality. So I'm going to think that's maybe, it's certainly right, but it's not the only right answer. So I'm going to hold on that one. Containing rising costs of independent single unit hospital. No, I mean, we're instead using antitrust to promote competition, and that means we want to keep as many competitors in the market, even small ones. Monitor the scope of health services. Yeah, no, that's not an antitrust issue. Protect the public's economic interests. So that one's broader because the public's economic interests are, we think, served by competition, and that will contain costs, but it will also increase quality. So I'm going to go with D.
Correct.
Number 7, 2 independent healthcare organizations interested in discussing a joint venture to initiate a cancer treatment program would be wise to initially consult with their legal counsel to determine if there A, a liability is equal even though disproportionately owned, B, financial gains or losses can be shared unequally, C, discussions might violate antitrust statutes, and D, current facilities can accommodate the program.
Okay, so it says we're initiating, we're discussing a joint venture to initiate a cancer treatment program. So we're looking at the discussion there, right? It's not really talking about the specifics of the program yet. So liability, financial gain, things like that are much more specific to the details of it that we'll want to talk about. Whether the facilities can accommodate the program, again, that's not a question I'm going to ask my lawyer. But even if we sit down and have a conversation, okay, are we violating antitrust statutes? And in some cases, yes, probably not by talking about a joint venture, but there are other situations where just sitting down and talking, like, hey, what are you going to charge next week? Would violate. So I'm going to go with C.
Okay.
Okay, I'm back. Under federal law, whenever a patient comes to a hospital emergency department with an emergency condition, A, with few exceptions, the patient's ability to pay may be considered in determining whether to provide treatment. B, with few exceptions, the patient's condition must be stabilized before she is transferred or discharged. C, a police officer may be asked to authorize treatment. Or D, the hospital has no duty to treat the person if she is not a patient or a member of the medical staff.
Yeah, I'm going to get rid of the low-hanging fruit first. Federal law does not have anything to do with police officers. We're talking about EMTALA here. So EMTALA requires that you do a screening exam to determine if there's an emergency, and if there is one, you've got to stabilize, right? So we can eliminate C pretty quickly, not part of the law. D is emphatically wrong because EMTALA is saying that there are duties to treat regardless of who's a patient or past patient relationship. So we can eliminate C and D real easily under low-hanging fruit. So can you think about ability to pay, determining whether to provide treatment? Well, if you're coming to the emergency department, that's the phrase in the law, coming to the emergency department, then if there is an emergency, they've got to stabilize you, right? So the few exceptions would be that they determine there's no emergency, which raises a lot of liability, so I don't think it happens often. So patient's ability to pay can be considered if there's not an emergency, but more likely B is going to be the answer.
So what I needed to be careful with when I first saw this question is all of a sudden, red flags, danger with these answers. Ability to pay was a big one, whether that's even considered. A police officer, if that's even considered, and then no duty. But I needed to stop, make sure I read and understood correctly, and then read each question. So your first thought is probably the most correct one, but still take the time to review the others.
Okay, finally.
That previous question we're reading backwards would have been super helpful if you go back to the last slide, emergency condition, the way it was described. So your ability to read it forwards and backwards, emergency condition, then would stick out for me, knowing about the EMTALA that we've been discussing. So thank you. Next one.
Okay, so this is our third area for today, which is governance and organizational structure. And this is not an area I like to think about as much as I like ethics and law. So feel free to chime in, everyone else. But again, you've got to know something about how organizations are run, we tend to focus on acute care hospitals very often with ACHE, but ACHE reminds us that it's healthcare, it's not hospital executives. So think more broadly, but we got some fairly generic stuff here. So knowledge of governance theory, what's mission, vision, values, relationship among the triad. And that triad's pretty unique to healthcare, but we've got the chair of the board of directors, board of trustees, the CEO, and the head of the medical staff or professional staff. You got to know what those relationships are and who's got the authority to do what. Governance structure is important. And again, unique to healthcare is medical staff structure. Most organizations don't have a medical staff. We do, and they've got a lot of authority and a lot of responsibility. So know what those are. One of the things I've told the students in our College Bowl prep is anytime you see the word ultimate accountability, ultimate authority, whatever the word ultimate is, think think governing board, right? Because they have the ultimate authority on everything in the hospital, and that includes deciding who has medical staff privileges. So that is a governing board decision. And so if you see the word ultimate, think governing board as you're reading the questions. Next.
First question, the finance committee of the board is responsible for A, monitoring budget performance, B, awarding CEO increases and bonuses, C, acting on behalf of the board in their absence, and D, permitting joint ventures with other corporations.
Okay, so now we're thinking, what's the role of committees? Committees usually are not the decision-making. They advise the entire board, they do work on behalf of the board, but they're not the one making final decisions on anything. So, awarding the CEO increase, no, that's a board function. Acting on behalf of the board, not the finance committee, maybe the executive committee, depending on how your board's set up. Permitting a joint venture, no, that's going to be the whole board having to do that. So I can eliminate those three pretty easily, go back to monitoring budget performance and budget, finance, yeah, those fit together. So that would be something the finance committee would do. Monitor the performance and then advise the board of what's going on.
Good job in the chat.
Number 2 questions for Nora? Or,
Okay, sorry. Couldn't get off mute. Okay. Which of the following should be included in an organization's mission statement? This one always throws me off. So which of the following should be included in an organization's mission statement? A, ethics, B, services, C, strategies, or D, facilities?
Right, so what do we know about mission statements? They're more specific than our big vision, but they're not really getting into a lot of details of how we do stuff. It's more of, why are we here? What are we supposed to be doing? So ethics, well, that's going to show up in your value statement. That's not really your mission statement, unless your mission is to be ethical. What services you provide, certainly, who you serve, what geographic area you serve, those would work in a mission statement. Strategies is how you do it, not what you do. Facilities is where you do it, not what you do. So I'm going to go with B.
and that's correct. Number 3 question, the duty of loyalty requires that a board member discloses all of their assets before becoming a board member. B, a board member belongs to as few healthcare organizations as possible. C, a board member refrains from conflicts of interest. And D, a board member serves out his or her entire term.
Okay, so now this one's interesting because it kind of overlaps with both law and ethics, and then it's applying it to the governing board. So duty of loyalty is someone's duty as a member of an organization to that organization, our fiduciary duty, right? If I'm on the board, I'm supposed to be doing things that help that organization. I'm supposed to be making decisions with the organization's interests in mind. So, okay, the board member discloses all assets. Yeah, not required. Board member belongs to as few organizations as possible. Might help me avoid conflict of interest, but it's not really required. Board member refrains from conflict of interest. Remember the definition. You have two duties and you can't do more than one. So as a board member, I've got a duty to the organization whose board I'm on. And if I have duties to other parties, then I have to refrain from any actions that put me in a conflict. So that one sounds good. Serving out the entire term, not really duty of loyalty. We appreciate it though. So I can eliminate A and B. D seems irrelevant. I'm gonna go with C.
And a tip on this question is there are different duty of a board member, like loyalty, care, obedience, those kind of stuff. Sometimes it get confusing again during the exam. So it's highly recommended to know those different duties, the differences. So, thank you.
Okay, and this is very simple, but it threw me off initially. The CEO of a hospital reports to the board chair, the executive committee of the board, the compensation and evaluation committee of the board, or D, the entire board.
Right, so who gets to hire the CEO? Who gets to fire the CEO? Right, it's not the board chair. That may be the person you're talking to. And again, we've got that triad there, but that's not the person with total responsibility for the CEO. Same with executive committee. I probably am very concerned about being friendly with the compensation committee, but it's really the entire board that's got the duty. So I'm gonna go with D.
Yeah, because initially I was thinking, okay, well, like you said earlier on, what are the functions of the committees? They're advisory, but the board has to vote and make those decisions. So.
Yeah, and the distractor here for me was the board chair, because on a day-to-day basis, who are you talking to about things? It's the board chair, but it's really the board that gets to decide if you keep your job.
Next question, the danger of having a large board, more than 17 is, the board can never have a quorum. B, the board will not be able to elect a chairperson. C, there will be too many committees. And D, the executive committee will make all of the important decisions.
Okay, so the board can never have a quorum. Well, first of all, I don't like the word never, but does having a larger board make it harder to get a quorum? Well, I've got more people who can show up. The proportion should be the same. Not be able to elect a chairperson. I don't know why that would be. Too many committees, not automatically. You got more people to serve on committees. Executive committee will make all the important decisions. Again, that's kind of how the board functions, but I don't really like any of those choices. And I like D, I dislike D less than I dislike the others. So I'm kind of looking at this negative here. I don't really like any of them, but I have to pick one. I don't have a four-sided coin to flip. So I think A and B seem really weak. D doesn't matter to me. So I'm gonna go with D.
You know, again, this is like, okay, if it's the answers aren't perfect, which one is the least worst? Make sense? Or the one you dislike the least, or the broadest.
Yeah.
Which might be the closest.
I mean, sometimes it's okay, I've got a bunch of them that sound good, which is the best of the good, or a bunch that sound bad, which is the least bad. But that's why really looking through each of them separately, playing around within your mind, and then making your decision is better than jumping right into the first one. And I'm going to say it again and again and again. You have plenty of time. Do not feel rushed, like you have to jump in and put something down quickly.
Well, and also this does point out that there are some issues with a large board. So at least in your study, you might be able to find if there's even a different answer. But the fact is that there are issues if you have too large a board.
And also remember, you can put a check mark on the test for the questions you want to go back and review. And if you're totally lost on it, or you're thinking, boy, this is a really stupid question, check it off and go back at the end, you know, after you've done the easier ones, and then you can look at it again and maybe spend some more time on it. But don't get totally hung up on it if it sounds like a bad question.
Hey, Rick, quick question. What is the role of an executive committee in general, across the country?
That's going to depend on what the bylaws define for that. So the bylaws may authorize the executive committee to do certain things, or it may say that the executive committee is able to act on some decisions between board meetings. It just depends on what they put, but most likely it's a quicker decision-making process because it's only 3 or 4 people, maybe 6 people to get together instead of your entire 17+ board. So that's why D is the better answer, because it may tend to say, God, we can't find all these people. We can't find a date we can all meet. Let's just let the executive committee do it.
Okay, regarding the hiring of employees, the board should be intimately involved in which of the following positions? Okay, hiring of employees. All management personnel. B, all employees within the organization. C, the CEO. Or D, all clinical personnel. And again, the important part here is, what is the board's responsibility in hiring of employees?
Okay, so I know that he is certainly there because that's one of the 2 big positions, or 2 functions the board does: approve the budget and hire the CEO. So I know that that's correct, but is it the most correct? So all management personnel. Well, how do we define management? Are we defining C-suite? If it said all C-suite personnel, I might say, okay, intimately involved, maybe not the decision maker, but be involved, maybe, but all management personnel seems really broad. All employees, God, no. And all clinical personnel, definitely not. So process elimination, again, even though it might be broader in some organizations, I know that they're going to hire the CEO. So I'll go with C.
Correct. And yeah, this is one of those cases where like the broadest may make more sense. But again, that depends mainly on, what the entity is like. But by definition, hiring the CEO is what the board does.
Next question. The most critical committee that requires tenured board member is A, audit committee, B, finance committee, C, nominating committee, or D, executive committee.
Okay, so I got to know something about the role of committees in a healthcare organization and have at least some idea of what each of them does. Tenured board members, I think what they're trying to say is not tenure like in a faculty, but tenure to someone who's been there a long time. So audit committee, not really. I think I'd rather have people who understand finance more than necessarily been there a long time. Same with finance committee. Nominating committee. Okay, now that would be good. I'd like nominating committee to know a lot about what's going on there so they can find people who can meet our needs. So maybe executive committee. Yeah, I mean, if we're going to trust the executive committee to be making decisions between board meetings, then yeah, they really have to know what's going on. So both C and D sound good, but D sounds better. Yeah, it's C.
Yeah, and the answer behind that one is the nominating committee. This was the logic behind this response. The nominating committee is the one that has the longer term view of the organization and starts planning on succession planning. And so that was the response to this. It could be that you're right, the executive committee is also correct. So again, the key here is we need to know what those committees do. That's the entire point of this question.
And recognize that sometimes you get down to 2 questions and you flip a coin and you're not required to have 100% to pass the test. So don't stress too much on it if you're wrong on these.
And always provide an answer, even if it's going to end up being wrong. You don't get penalized for answering incorrectly unless you don't answer the question.
Last one.
Okay, a member of the board of a healthcare organization also serves as the medical director of a competing organization. Right away, there's some red flags. Which one of these duties of a board is applicable to the situation? A, duty of care. B, duty of obedience. C, business judgment rule. Or D, duty of loyalty.
Okay, so I mean, that description sounds to me like a conflict of interest. So duty of care means I have to do a good job. Duty of obedience sounds like something you require of a nun or something. I'm not sure what that is.
Yeah.
Business judgment rule is how boards do not get sued, because if you used your judgment, even if it didn't work out right, then you're not liable. So I can eliminate those. Duty of loyalty, yeah, duty of loyalty is don't have a conflict of interest. Be loyal to the organization whose board you're on. So knowing it's a conflict of interest that's described, I can go with the duty of loyalty.
Correct.
Those are a lot of questions. Thanks, everyone.
So right away, I'll let you guys know, I've had several comments that having the questions in all caps was confusing. So I'm going to be sending out this presentation later in the follow-up emails. I'm going to not have all caps. Hopefully that'll be easier to read. And I will correct question number 4, and I'm going to research question number 2 with an ethicist that I know. So.
And this is Michael. Maybe in the next slide or next future slides, I will share them. We can also share the question about the number or ideal number of board members in the
FAQ follow-ups,
because that was the one question last time we had.
Okay.
And Nora, we had a request to provide some background on the patient's rights question. I think that there were a couple, there was non-legitimate reason for release of medical records, and then the patient rights question. So we'll get that.
Okay.
I wanted to, before we started our Quizlet, I just wanted to have Connie help us a bit, because Connie has reached out to purchase the ACHE study card. So if you just give us a minute or two, Connie, we appreciate it. It's helpful.
Sure. So I purchased the flashcards. They come in a box like this, you can see. And what's nice about them is that they're color coded. So you can see my camera. Can everyone see that? Mm-hmm. So yeah. They're color coded by topic. So today we did governance and organizational structure. So this is part of the stack for that. So you can see that there's a good chunk there. And then here is laws and regulations. And so here's our EMTALA question. And so this is what it looks like. Here's the topic, and then you flip it over and it gives you the definition. Okay. And when you purchase these, you also get a digital version of it. And so you can log into ACHE and access your flashcards that way, and you can mix them up and they will, show this way. And then, as you advance the slides, it'll give you the answer. So there's my camera. So this is a lengthy answer for what a mission is, what's included in a mission. And so happy to answer any questions about the flashcards. For me personally, I like to have the cards in front of me. I like to handle them. I like to just quiz myself while I'm sitting on the couch. I'll just take a stack and then say, okay, for the next hour, I'm going to focus on governance and organizational structure. That's all I'm going to do today. And then, the next day I'll pick another topic. So, everyone has their different way of doing it. Some people like to just shuffle the deck and you get what you get and you quiz yourself. So it allows for, different ways of learning.
Thank you, Connie. We'll note that on the back of at the bottom, it'll show reference to where you can find additional information.
Yeah.
Sources.
Thank you. Thanks very much. Appreciate it. All right, our Quizlet.
Yay, Quizlet.
Okay. Can everyone see my slide on my screen now? So let's start with the professionalism and ethics. Okay, so the first question, true or false? A 40-year-long syphilis study on 600 African American men in Macon County, Alabama, that misinformed its subjects and prevented treatment for the syphilitic men in the group is called the Tuskegee study. True or false? Can someone tell me what's the answer of the group is?
Sorry, I was on mute. Tango.
Okay, good.
Sorry.
Next one, the ethical principle of making decisions independently or for oneself is called justice. True or false?
We got F, Foxtrot.
Okay, I'll take false. Next is a responsibility under fiduciary duty that requires an individual or a group to act with the same care and prudence that any reasonable entity would exercise is called duty of care.
We've got T, Tango.
T, Tango. So I will just ask 3 questions for the true or false and 3 questions for the matching type in the interest of time. So I'll go down to the multiple questions. Question number 1. Uniform set of regulations on the ethical conduct of research involving human subjects established by the federal agencies that fund such research, formally Federal Policy for the Protection of Human Subjects. A, authorized users. B, common rule. C, case consultation. Or D, Nuremberg Code.
We have so far D, Delta.
D, Delta. The act of putting first the best interests of stakeholders, which leads to building and maintaining trust. A, good faith duty. B, security, C, medical futility, and D, stewardship.
A alpha.
Alpha. And the last question is International Ethics Guide for Physicians Conducting Research Using Human Subjects, developed by the World Medical Association and originally adopted in Helsinki, Finland, is called A, Law Fallacy, B, Nuremberg Code, C, Declaration of Helsinki, or D, Fiduciary Duty.
So far we have one C. Charlie, two C's, three C's. Okay.
Okay, let's take Charlie and let's check our answers for this section. Check answers. We got 4 out of 6. Let's look at it. So the Tuskegee study is correct for true. Justice is correct. Oh, it should be correct. Definition is autonomy. So that's not correct. So instead of justice, it should be autonomy for the ethical principle. Duty of care is correct. And let's go down to the matching type, multiple choice. The correct answer is common rule instead of Nuremberg Code. And also with the act of putting first the best interest of the stakeholders, correct answer is stewardship instead of good faith duty. And the last one is Declaration of Helsinki, correct. Okay, great. So let's move on to the next topic, right? Let's go to governance and organizational structure. Okay, first question. A group of agenda items passed without discussion unless a member requests a review used to focus attention on priority matters is called ad hoc committee. True or false?
F, Foxtrot.
Take the F. Next question. A committee formed to address a specific purpose for a specified time period is also called ad hoc committee. That's the term. Is this true or false?
We're getting T, Tango.
Tango. Next question. Decisions permanently vested in the central corporation of a multi-corporate system is called span of control. True or false?
The majority have, well, it's almost split right now. One more person. F, Foxtrot.
Okay. Let's go to the multiple choice. The number of subordinates reporting to a supervisor. A, chain of command. B, credentialing. C, span of control. D, reserved powers.
We've got C, Charlie.
C, Charlie. Okay. Next question. Specialization of work that breaks down tasks in a production process so that personnel become highly proficient in components of the process? A, governance bylaws. B, external auditor. C, division of labor. D, chain of command.
C, Charlie.
C, Charlie. Take that. And last question for this is measures of overall enterprise performance grouped in major dimensions: customers, staff and suppliers, operations, quality or cost, and finance, reported to the governing board and appropriate for service lines, the healthcare organizations as a whole, or its major components. A, clinical staff bylaws. B, strategic scorecard. C, trustees. D, management letter.
B, bravo.
Bravo. Okay. Then let's check our answers. Okay, I think we get 100% on this, 6 out of 6. Yay. Good job, everyone. So a group of agenda passed. It's called ad hoc committee. It's false. It's called consent agenda. The other one is true. It's ad hoc committee formed to address a specific purpose for a specified time period. Span of control is correct. Oh, false. It's not. It's false. It's called reserved powers. Then let's go to the multiple choice. The number of subordinates reporting to a supervisor is span of control is correct. Great. The specialization of work that breaks down tasks, it's called division of labor. And the last one is strategic scorecard. Yay, good job. Let's go to the last one, which is healthcare laws. Laws and regulation. Test. Okay, we're good. Okay, question number 1, true or false? An organization of hospitals, physicians, and other providers who, under a shared governance structure, coordinate patient care, are accountable for the quality and costs of that care, and receive bonuses when they deliver care more efficiently, is called community health needs assessment. True or false?
We got F, Foxtrot.
Okay. As defined by the HIPAA, a health plan, healthcare clearinghouse, or healthcare provider that transmits any health information in electronic form is called covered entity. True or false?
One more we need. It's tied. Okay, we have F, Foxtrot.
Okay. And the last one is the federal law used most often to prosecute those who present false or fraudulent claims to Medicare and Medicaid claims is called False Claims Act. True or false?
T, Tango.
Okay. Let's go to the matching type. Oh, multiple choice. Keep on saying matching type, sorry. Question number 1. A hospital's systematic evaluation of its community health and needs, which a tax-exempt hospital must undertake at least once every 3 years to maintain its tax-exempt status. A, Tax Equity and Fiscal Responsibility Act. B, Accountable Care Organization. C, Not-for-profit. D, Community Health Needs Assessments.
D, Delta.
Delta, we'll take Delta. Question number 2, a serious adverse occurrence resulting from failure to follow standard medical practices and generally considered to be negligence per se, an outcome that could never occur. A, not-for-profit. B, never event. C, anti-kickback statute. Or D, negligence.
B, Bravo.
Never event. Okay. And the last question for this section is, any health-related information that identifies or can be used to identify the individual to whom it pertains. A, protected health information. B, charitable immunity. C, unrelated business income. D, designated health services.
A, Alpha.
Uh-huh. And survey says, let's check our answers. Oh, okay, we got one mistake here. So community health assessment is good, is correct for the true or false. Oh, we got false, and it should be accountable care organization instead of community health needs assessment. So this is the definition of the ACO. Not quite, you're still learning. So what's this? Covered entity.
It should be true.
It should be true. Okay. And the last one is False Claim Act is true.
Good.
Good. And let's go to the multiple choice. Excellent. Community health needs assessment. Question number 1. Number 2 is, we got it. It's never event.
Good.
And the third one is, we got it to the PHI.
Good.
Good job, everyone. Thank you.
Congrats. Thank you.
This kind of gives us an example of a place where you may not have known an answer on an early question, but then you see the choices in a later question and you think, wait a minute, now I know the first one, go back and change it. You know, if you've gotten a hint. And I think we saw that with several of these here.
Thanks, Rick. So thank you again for being with us. Nora will give you the cadence of our emails again, so you'll get that. And we hope to see you in some costumes next week. And we hope that you will join us and have fun, and we'll have prizes. So take away, Nora, and then we will close.
Okay, so I was a little out of sequence this week, but you should be receiving the follow-up email with today's presentation, plus some additional sample questions, a corrected presentation. And then the second email you should be receiving this week will be the prep work for session number 5, which is IT and quality, just minor topics that we need to know about.
All right. Well, thank you so much, and enjoy the rest of your fall Saturday. Stay dry, and we again really appreciate you having us host with you the Board of Governor review exam. So have a great rest of your weekend.
Bye.